What happens to your culture when things get hard? Do people speak up or do they stay silent? Do they lean into the discomfort or do they avoid it? And have you ever stopped to ask yourself, is your culture built on real courage and connection or just surface level harmony? Because here's the reality. Culture isn't defined in the easy moments. It's defined in the moments of pressure, tension and truth. In today's episode, I welcome back Bill Benjamin for a powerful follow-up conversation that builds on his work around the last 8%. In our first conversation, we explored what happens inside of us under pressure. Individually, the emotional reactions that either cause us to mess up or avoid what really needs to be said. But today, we take it a step further. We explore how those individual behaviours don't just impact us, they shape the culture around us. Bill introduces a powerful way to think about culture through two critical dimensions, courage and connection. Too much courage without connection, you create a harsh transactional environment. Too much connection without courage, and you create comfort without accountability. This is a conversation about truth, trust, and what it really takes to create an environment where people can speak up, take risks, and do their best work. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Leadership Project. I have a special treat for you today. We have a return guest. From episode 305, we have Bill Benjamin, the co-author of an upcoming book called The Last 8%. Now, if you haven't heard that episode, I do encourage you to go back and listen to it, but I'll give you the quick summary now to set the scene for what we're about to talk about. Bill's done deep research on the difference between high-performance teams and high-performance cultures compared to the rest of us. And this concept called the last 8% comes up in multiple ways. So what do the last 8% do differently? In the previous episode, we spoke a lot about the individual leader, or even the individual contributor, and some of their behaviors that lead to the culture in a last 8% organization, or more importantly, what happens with the rest of us. We spoke about what happens in moments of stress, those high stress situations. Are you the type of leader that's a make a messer, where you have an emotional reaction and you erupt? Or are you an avoider? And Bill's research shows that we're about 1/3, 2/3 between these two. And sometimes it switches depending on where we are in the organization. Or even you individually. One day you might be an avoider. The next day you might get emotionally hijacked and you're a make-a-messer and you're exploding. So we spoke a lot about what you can do to have little pattern interrupts, that if you find yourself in these situations, if you find yourself avoiding when you should be leaning in, or you find yourself exploding when you should be sitting back and listening, what you can do to do this. He gave us a model called SOS, stop, oxygenate, and seek information, to help you calm down the emotional nervous system and to stay calm but not avoid the situation. So really great practical tips, and I really encourage you to go back and listen to episode 305. You can do it after this episode. You don't have to go back there now. The two are going to work together. One of the key ones was in the last 8%, avoiding the last 8% of what needed to be said. So you might have had the courage to start the conversation, but did you have the courage to say what really needed to be said? And this is a big difference between these high performance cultures and the rest of us. I'll just call it that for the moment. Now, in that episode, we spent a lot of time talking about the individuals and the individual behavior, but it was leading up to something bigger, which is what Bill calls the last 8% culture map. Now, this is the organizational view of the same concepts, and it's quite multifaceted, and there's going to be a lot into this. So we need to get into it. So Bill, without any further ado, welcome back to the show. Thank you so much for coming back and sharing your time and your wisdom with us.
Thank you for having me back. I'm excited. And by the way, what a great summary. I actually wish I could bring you to all my keynotes. So at the end, I'll say, and to summarize, here's Mick.
Well, thank you, Bill.
Because you did such a great job. And for those that haven't heard the 305 episode, I thought Mick did one of the best interviews I've ever had in terms of, how he approached it. So thank you. Great to be back.
All right. Thank you, Bill. Really greatly appreciate it. And thank you for your feedback. I really appreciate it. Help us now do this connection. So we're going to go from the individual through to the collective. What does this last 8% culture map look like?
Yeah, and let me do a little bit of introduction to how we came up with this or why. For many years we've done individual development, individual contributor development, individual leader development, and that's hugely impactful. What we know from the research, and we came across this about 7 or 8 years ago, is that in order for someone to show up and perform a certain function or behavior with a certain attitude, which is what businesses need, there's two elements to it. One is the individual capabilities and attitudes. That's about 50%. The other 50% is the environment, the culture they're in. So if you want to create a culture where people speak up, but senior leaders are shooting their ideas down in meetings, they're going to be a lot less likely to speak up. So our work starts at the individual level, and then now we've added this whole work at the team and the culture level. And a couple of myths that I like to dispel before introducing the culture map is one is that culture is established by creating a set of values and putting them on a wall and hoping that everyone and sending people coasters and little mugs and hoping everyone behaves that way. And there's nothing wrong with having values. You want to know what the goalpost is. But where culture really exists is in the difficult moments because of the cortisol effect, which is that when there's tension, when there's pressure, when there's conflict, our cortisol gets released, which causes memories to sear in. So we remember what someone was doing in that tough, what we call last 8% moment. We don't remember what anyone was doing in the 92% of moments when everyone was getting along and everyone was, So people don't always show up in alignment with the values when they're under pressure. So that's really where culture exists, is in those tough last 8% moments. So that's one myth, is you need both the values, but you also need the tools and the skills and the culture where people can show up in alignment with those values in the tough moments.
Yeah, really good, Bill. So key lesson there already, that our culture is not directly connected to the office wall plaque that says that this is the way we behave. It's the micro moments of the actions that happen in those high cortisol moments. And and you mentioned this in episode 305, by the way, that these are the memories that are the lasting memories. The 92% of the time when everything is smooth sailing, people almost don't remember any of that. But they remember the moments of high pressure cooker when the boss exploded in that meeting, and now coming to the actions reinforcing the values. It's, you use the speak up culture as a great example. I have a story that I share often here, Bill, that if you want to create a speak up culture, you have to celebrate and reward every time someone speaks up, even if you don't agree with them. You have to listen to them. You have to thank them, even if it's the stupidest idea you've ever heard. If you say, "Oh, Bill, that's the stupidest idea I've ever heard," do you think that person's ever going to speak up again, let alone anyone else that heard that conversation? So it's in these micro moments whether the culture is what you want or not want.
Yeah. And the other behavior that's more of an avoidance behavior that really sets the tone of the culture is when the boss doesn't deal with underperformers or toxic behaviors. And we've all been guilty of that. That is so hard. I've been guilty of allowing either an underperformer or someone who's performing, but leaving bodies in their wake, to go unaddressed. That affects the whole team. That sends a signal about what's okay and what's not. And so, so it's those moments that establish the culture, not just the values on the wall. So that's one myth. Another myth is that culture exists across an organization. It actually doesn't. It exists on individual teams. That is where the fundamental unit of culture is. That's why we've worked with hospitals where they're performing the same function on 2 floors, but they have completely different cultures, depending on the leader, depending on what the last 8% moments they've been through, what's been established as norms of behavior. So the good news about that is that each of your people on these calls that are managers or leaders of teams, that means you can own the culture on your team. You don't have to wait for the CEO or the VP of HR to do something. You can have a culture around you that's not functional, but you can be like the umbrella for your team, where you have a high performing team, even though there isn't high performance around you. And that actually allows you to stand out. So I think that really gives folks agency about the impact they can have for the culture of their own teams.
Oh, I love this, Bill. This is a loud and clear message for us all to hear. And I've come across two things here, Bill, in my career. One is the almost victim mindset of what could I do? I'm just a middle manager or a team leader. What could I do? That's just the way things are around here. A little bit of acceptance without taking accountability and ownership of your own area. And I'm going to say that even worse, I'm going to say when the team leader and the manager gets involved in the kind of the blame culture or the rubbishing the culture around here of they start dissing the environment and saying, oh, this bloody place, etc. Well, it's your job to help fix it, and it's in your control.
Or the avoidance culture, where they're just like, oh, I can't do anything about that. I can't deal with that. I'm not going to give feedback to my peer, who's having an impact on my team. So it's both that make a mess and avoidance behaviors.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
So culture exists on teams. Now, when we work with an organization and we do our culture system, we start with the very senior team and we cascade it throughout the whole organization. So you can be intentional and have a culture that's more homogeneous across, but that's when that's done intentionally, and it starts with the senior team. But if you're not the CEO of the company, that doesn't mean you can't influence culture, both in your team and the teams around you. So that's the second myth. The third and final myth is that culture is mostly about empathy and connection and engagement and making people happy, and that's important. Right? There's going to be a shortage of good people for the jobs you have, so you need engagement, you need retention, but it's only half of what makes a culture high performing. So we talk about one half being connection. That's the psychological safety. That's that people feel valued. They have a voice. They're happy to be there. The second, though, is courage. Some of the stuff we've talked about, that willingness to step in, have a tough conversation, make a tough decision, take a risk. And I didn't talk about that as much last time, but the last 8% isn't only about tough conversations, although that's the thing that most people have the felt need for, like, oh my God, I have to have this conversation, help me. But it's also about taking risks, taking on new projects, trying new things to be innovative. It's about making tough decisions, not the easy decision, but the one where people aren't going to be happy or they're not going to like you, but it's the right decision. So this whole idea of courage is much broader than just stepping into conversations.
Yeah, really good.
So those are the two key pillars of a high performance culture that actually build our culture map.
Okay. All right. So what I'm hearing so far, Bill, so really good. First of all, that the culture is not created by putting nice words on the office wall plaque. It's created in those key moments, those high stress moments. And it comes from, these are not your words, but I'm going to play back what I'm taking from it, Bill. It comes from what we celebrate and reward. It also comes from what we tolerate and accept. If we tolerate underperformance, if we tolerate toxic behavior, it starts to set the culture. Okay. The second part is it's not the CEO's job. It's down to the individual team, which I think is a very powerful moment for everyone.
It is, though. The CEO needs to model.
Yeah.
And so, where we've impacted a culture of an entire organization, it did start with the CEO. However, if you're 3 levels down from the CEO and you don't have an ability to influence that, that doesn't mean it's time to give up. That means, focus on what you can control, which is your team in your area.
Very good. That's the message I want the leaders to take away is don't step back. You're part of this. You lean in. That's what I meant by that. And then the third one, I'll just use my own words here and say, it's not about creating a pillow environment where everyone feels loved and it's a family. And I know this is going to come up as we go through the culture map. It's also about courage. And courage is not just the courageous conversations. It's courage to be decisive and make hard decisions that need to be made. And it's about taking risks, because if you don't take a risk, you never reap the benefit of an opportunity.
Great. Absolutely. You're right on. So we took those two key pillars, connection and courage, and we created a 4x4 map. So I want you to imagine, a map where on the left axis, on the upright axis is courage, and on the bottom axis is connection. And by the way, This is all summarized, and there's a picture of this in our Harvard Business Review article titled "The Secret to High Performing Teams." And so maybe we can even, at the end, let people know where to go find it when you go to HBR to find that. But so I want you to think of a culture then that's in the upper left quadrant out of these four quadrants. So it's high courage but low connection. That's a transactional culture. That's a culture where results matter over relationships. It's more of a make a mess, blame environment, like you talked about, right? It's more toxic behaviors are tolerated, and it's a high stress and high anxiety environment. It can get results in the short term, but it's not sustainable over the long term because people become disengaged. They start to stop giving feedback. They stop feeling important and valued. And so it feels like if we just, get on everyone and tell them what to do, that can work for a short period of time, but it doesn't last over the long term. So that's the top left is transactional.
Yeah, really good. I think a number of us have been in organizations like that. And I love what you said about the temporal aspect of that is one of the challenges here, Bill. Let's double down on this one for a second before we go to the others. One of the challenges here is you can get the short-term results.
Yes.
And I can imagine this can start becoming a bit addictive, or even, what's the word I'm looking for? Because the results are coming, people go, oh, we just have to sprint one more time. We just have to and before you know it, they're not breaking the pattern because it was, from a results point of view, it was working in the short term. So they keep on going. How do you break that pattern?
So it comes to really awareness. It's like anything. So it comes to assessing. I mean, that's part of our culture system is we do have an assessment and identifying, the areas where that's happening, which teams, which areas, and what are the specific behaviors that are leading to that. And then creating a norm on a team that says, okay, when there's a missed deadline, when there's, a change to, a proposal, here's how we're going to handle that. We're not going to yell at people. We're not going to, so that you actually start to create a team charter that says, because one of the things people worry about is when you move away from transactional and add connection, it feels like, oh, but then we have to lose performance. Then we have to lower our expectations. That is not the case. This is about both. You can have a very high performing team that's also high in connection, high in care, high in empathy and trust. And in fact, that's actually what sustains performance. So the way you shift a transactional culture is to identify it and then identify behaviors that are leading to it being transactional and add in some of the more high connection, high care behaviors.
Yeah, really good. Okay, so high courage, low connection will lead to a transactional situation where results are more important than people and more important than relationships. Might work for a while, but it'll foster potentially toxic environments where I'm going to say people will burn out, people will leave. It won't work in the long term.
Or worse, they burn out and don't leave.
Yeah, okay.
But they're disengaged. I mean, the engagement numbers, Gallup just came up with a survey. The engagement numbers are awful. I think only like 27% of employees are engaged and 17% are actively disengaged. So yeah, that's what that environment leads to. Okay, so let's think about the bottom right-hand side where it's high connection, but it's low courage. That's a family culture, and you used that term earlier. That's a nice culture, but people are unwilling to do hard things. By the way, 16% of teams in our research are in transactional. 38%, the highest percent, are in family. So this is the most common, and it tends to be more of an avoidance culture. You don't want to upset people. You want people to like you. That there is high care. We see a lot of this in healthcare. We see a lot of this in the Midwest. Midwest nice. Canadian. I'm a Canadian. We have Canadian nice. But you see it, anywhere. And so the other thing that happens is decision making gets slowed down because you have to include everyone and everyone has to be happy. And there's nothing wrong with consensus decision making, but taken too far, it really slows things down. So it's a culture where people feel engaged and they're happy, but underperformance isn't being dealt with. Feedback isn't being given. The challenge, innovation slows down because people aren't challenging the status quo. They're not taking risks to try new ideas. So it's safe, but it's not high performance. It's not. We like to say, because some of our clients, they'll stand up and say, "Oh, we're like a family," and we say, "You're not a family. You don't fire your lowest performing kid. You might want to some days,
I was thinking that.
but you don't." And so, it's not enough to be family.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So very good. I think there's a lot of organizations that fall into this, and the avoidance, I'm not surprised to hear you say that. There's also this kind of, we spoke about it in the last interview, the need for love and belonging and the need to want to be liked and all this kind of stuff may be pervaded in here. I'm going to throw something to you and say, in the transactional, we spoke about toxicity might take over, and that will lead to a lot of disengagement. When I hear you talk about the family culture, I'm then imagining the word frustration, right? So it might, on the surface, it might feel really nice. It's a warm, cuddly pillow environment, like I said, and everyone's treated nicely and all that kind of stuff. But what I'm wondering whether the subculture that festers here is frustration at the indecisiveness, frustration at the lack of management of underperformance, the frustration that things aren't getting done because people aren't making decisions, taking risks, or taking actions. So frustration pervades.
Absolutely. That is so observant. And typically it's the frustration of your high performers, of your change agents, of your innovators. So absolutely, family culture can also lose people because they get frustrated. Colin Powell has a great quote. He says, not addressing underperformers, the main thing that does is demotivate your high performers, right? Not only do you not address their performances, but you demotivate your high performers. So absolutely, great observation.
Okay, excellent. All right, so where do we go from here, Bill?
All right, so bottom left then is low connection and low courage. That's a fear-based culture. That's a little bit of your older, archetypal command and control culture. It's my way or the highway. People walking on eggshells, afraid to, speak up, afraid to try new things. Fortunately, we don't see as much of that today. That's 12% of cultures. And by the way, we just had new numbers. So if my numbers don't add up to 100, I apologize. But we don't see as much of fear-based, although a lot of people tell me I've been in a fear-based culture. So it does exist. If you're doing the math, if I did the math right, 67% of cultures are in those three quadrants that are not high performing. Now, the ultimate goal is to be in the upper right-hand quadrant where it's both high connection and high courage, which is characterized by high care and high accountability. That idea that both can exist together. And we say that connection comes before courage. Because Mick, if you're going to give me feedback about something, and I know you have my best interests in mind, and I trust you and respect you, I'm way more open to it than if I don't know where you're coming from. And last time you criticized me in a meeting. So when there's that connection, that actually unlocks this high risk, high feedback rich environment that creates innovation and smart risk taking.
Yeah, the feedback one's an interesting one to start on, Bill. And I'm going to use the word care and feedback, and it doesn't always go together. And when someone is receiving feedback, if they feel like they're under attack, that the person's attacking them, all they're going to do is get defensive. But if they feel like the person cares about them, and I'm not lovey-dovey family, but cares about them enough to have the courageous conversation with them, and the feeling like the feedback has the intent of helping me, the feedback has the intent that this person's got my back. They're not attacking me, they've got my back. They're trying to draw to my attention something that I need to address to do a better job, then it's a different conversation. How does that sit with you?
Absolutely. That's why we say connection comes before courage. And it's actually that connection, that care that unlocks the high performance and the high courage. Even as a leader, if you make a decision, let's say somebody's really advocating for something, a project they really believe in, and you're going to say no, they're much more likely to accept that, not undermine you, not go away and complain. Again, if you have a high connection, they felt heard, they know you respect them. Because Stephen Jobs said, if you want everybody happy all the time, don't become a leader, sell ice cream. Because you can't always keep everyone happy. And as a leader, It isn't, you have to have the tough conversations, but you also have to make the decisions that sometimes people don't agree with and aren't happy with. And they will be way more likely to follow you and support you, even though they don't agree with you, if you have that connection first.
Yeah, really interesting. I've got a saying I use sometimes, Bill. I'll just test it with you that people can quite often understand and accept a decision that's contrary to the one that they wanted, as long as they felt like they understood the rationale of the decision. But what I'm hearing from you now is it needs to start with the connection that we get each other first, that you feel seen, you feel heard, you feel valued. And then when I listen to you, let's say we're making a crucial decision and I've truly listened to you and you've gone, Mick, I think we need to turn left. And I've listened to all of the different variables and I've decided to turn right. If I've got a good connection with you, I can have a conversation with you that says, Bill, I really did hear you. Thank you for your input. I really appreciate it. We're going to turn right and here's why.
Yes. Because imagine somebody makes a decision you don't agree with, but they never really listen. You didn't feel like they ever really listened to you or heard your rationale or respected your opinion. You're like, okay, well, you say you're going right. You got your reasons, but you didn't listen to me. So the two really do go hand in hand. I think one of the things that people really struggle with in terms of listening to someone's point of view is they feel like if I'm going to be high care or empathetic, it means I have to agree with them. And that is not what care and empathy are about. It's about listening and understanding, because they might have something to say that helps you change your mind or gives or helps with input. But even if you completely disagree with them, they still want to feel heard and understood. But you don't have to agree with them. You can still say no. By the way, that is a last 8% kind of decision and conversation all in one that a lot of people struggle with, is saying no to someone, because they'll be disappointed. They'll be unhappy. They won't like you in that moment. And we all want to be liked. And we don't want to make people unhappy. And so that whole area of saying, but unfortunately, people sometimes think if I'm going to hear someone's point of view, then I have to agree with them, which is not the case.
I had one yesterday. This is so funny listening to you. I had one yesterday that went wrong, and I know where it went wrong now. But I think it also comes in framing that original conversation. When you are seeking inputs and you're making people feel seen, heard, and valued. So the one I had yesterday, I had engaged with this person about a decision I was going to make, and they gave me the contrary. They didn't agree with the decision, but I did hear them. I did take their opinion, and then I acted and went in a certain direction. And this was about a week ago. Then yesterday they said to me, you asked my permission and then did it anyway. You hear that word, permission? I didn't ask their permission. I was just looking for their insights and what am I missing here and all this kind of stuff. But they interpreted it as you asked my permission and you did it anyway. So I know that I didn't frame correctly that first conversation. How does that sit with you, Bill?
I mean, totally makes sense. I mean, that whole framing, how we set up these conversations, and we have a whole kind of protocol in our, in our training and in our book that we're writing on how to approach a difficult conversation in a skillful way. And so that whole how it's framed is a critical part of it.
Yeah. And to set some context here, this person's a peer, not a team member. I went and asked a peer for input on something. They wanted me to, I'll just use the same metaphor. They wanted me to turn left and all evidence told me I should turn right. They said, you asked my permission and then you turned right. So yeah, but I didn't frame it properly.
And you brought up a really great point, because for a lot of people, the dealing with my boss and dealing with my employees, I mean, yes, they can mess that up sometimes, but it's clear that the PDI, the power distance indicator, right, where it can get way more complicated is with peers, because you don't have authority over them, but they don't have authority over you. So, you're trying to collaborate, you're trying to come to mutual decisions. You don't want to have to go to your boss because you think they're wrong, or you don't want to get that involved. And so that whole how you influence, many last 8% conversations are about influencing without authority. And so that's another whole area where when you are in an upper right-hand quadrant culture, there is much more cross feedback and acceptance and listening to feedback and, negotiating and, working things out across, not just up and down.
All right, really good. Now, there's at least 4 things I want to unpack here one at a time, Bill. So let's go with one, which is you said connection before courage. If someone's listening to this and they're going, yeah, I've tried a bit of this. I've tried the courage. They've dabbled, etc., and it hasn't landed. How do they start with what you said, connection before courage?
I mean, that could literally be the conversation. It could be, hey, I'm trying to lead this team to be a high performing team, and we've had some challenges, and I feel like part of the problem is we don't know each other that well. We don't understand it. I'd like to get to know you a little bit better. And it doesn't mean you have to talk about, their butterfly collection if you don't like butterflies, or it's not having to have that personal connection, but what are some of the challenges you're facing? And what are some of the things you're most passionate about here at work? Like it can be about work. So you can literally say to someone, let's take 15 minutes and just get to know each other a little bit and try to create that connection. But it can be framed in the frame of, and I have a job to do and I want to be able to do it well while I'm working with you.
I'm going to say that conversation could end up being a microcosm of connection and courage as well, by the way. Just listening to you there, if you're trying to build a connection with someone, that get to know them better, and you might have worked with them already for a few years and you feel like you don't know them as well as you should, I'm going to put something to you, Bill, and this is something I've studied in coaching and psychology, is that in that first conversation, when you're resetting something that you've never asked them that question before or whatever, they won't have the courage in the first sentence to tell you what their real challenge is. So you need to set the environment, and that they are going to build the courage to tell you what's really on their mind. And it's going to be built in little micro moments in that conversation as to how you react to the first thing they say. So they'll start with something relatively small. This is a last 8% concept as well. So they might be deeply worried about something and they've never been able to tell you about it. But in that first conversation, they're not going to hit the last 8% in the first sentence.
Yeah, they don't want to share. They don't want to look weak.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, they don't want to use it against them. And one of the things we really recommended, there's a whole chapter in the book about this, but it's actually starting with vulnerability. Vulnerability is so disarming, and it leads to other people then being able to be vulnerable. A lot of people think vulnerability is weakness. It's not. It's actually takes courage to say, gosh, I'm struggling on this project. I'm not feeling like I'm bringing enough to it. Like, I want us to work together to figure this out. So like that little bit of vulnerability can really open up that connection.
Really good. Okay. So start with some vulnerability to set the scene that it's okay to be vulnerable, right? And then give them the license to be a bit vulnerable. And then I'm going to say, even then, they will start with something small. And subconsciously, they're subtly testing you. They're going to share something that's not good news, but it's minor on the scheme of things, just to see how you react. And if you react in a calm and helpful way, they'll go, oh, okay.
You validate, you listen, you maybe even ask some more questions, get them talking even more. Again, the thing I think people struggle with is they think this means, oh, I'm going to have to agree or give in. That's not what that is. It's about, can you really listen? Can they really feel heard and understood? Can you validate? And then maybe you come back and say, okay, well, based on what you're telling me, I'm thinking we could approach it this way, and so you're trying to build the bridge from both sides, not just launch from your side. We have this model of building a bridge where most people start from their side of the bridge, and where we're saying, get to the other side of the bridge, start from their perspective, right? Learn a little bit more about them and try to build the bridge back. Doesn't mean you have to agree with them or give in, though.
Okay. All right. Very good. So in this connection, we're getting to know each other a little bit more. We're getting to show them that they're seen, heard, and valued. We're showing them that we've got their back, that we're here for them, and we're trying to build that connection. And now I'm going to say that we're setting the scene for two things. Once we have that connection, we're able to take more courageous decisions with them, et cetera, but we're also giving them the license to be more courageous and speak up and tell us the last 8% that they've been holding back.
Yeah, that psychological safety where they feel safe to speak up. Absolutely.
Yeah, really good. Okay, so number one, connection versus courage. Connection before the courage. Okay. The next one I want to talk about then is the 3 chapters of things that we've been talking about, Bill. So it's going to be It's going to be feedback, risk-taking, and decisiveness. Let's go to the feedback one. So feedback is one of those avoidance ones. Absolutely. I think it's a very common thing. But what tips do you have for people that do want to give feedback with high accountability and high care, where it doesn't turn, like the easy thing for it to turn is it turns into a high care pillow conversation and you avoid what really needed to be said, versus high accountability jerk no care? How do we get this right?
Here's the advice. It's 2 meetings. What do I mean by it's 2 meetings? Most people, when they go to give feedback, like they genuinely care, they prepare, and they think about it. They stay up at night, and they finally get in, and they're a little anxious, and they launch in. Okay, well, you did this, and you need to do this, we do this. We're making statements. The other person's like, oh my God, they're deer in headlights, and they're triggered, and they're defending. You want to be curious in meeting 1, then speak up in meeting 2. So in an ideal world, it literally is 2 different meetings. You've got some feedback to give to somebody, but before you do, you're going to meet with them and hear their point of view. Tell me what's going on in the project. Tell me what your thoughts are. And here's the amazing thing. Sometimes when you do that, people know. They know they've messed up. They're, oh my gosh, I'm struggling with this and I'd like to be better at it. And they're giving the feedback to themselves, and you never have to, right? Because they're self-diagnosing. So that doesn't always happen, but that can happen. Secondly, when you do that, sometimes you learn something you didn't know. Oh, I didn't realize your colleague was the one that didn't meet the deadline that caused you to da-da-da. So sometimes you learn something you didn't know. And third, you get them talking first, where they feel heard and they feel listened to. And if you can, you literally say, okay, I've really heard you. You've given me lots to think about. I'd like to schedule our next meeting and talk about it further. And maybe it's later in the day, or maybe it's the next day. So that you create some space. You get to go in and think about it. You get to plan based on new information you might have learned. And then in the second meeting is when you speak up. And I'll get to that in a moment. What does that speak up look like? Now, there may be times when it's physically not realistic to have 2 separate physical meetings. It needs to be done in one meeting. But you still want to think about it in your mind like you're having 2 meetings. The first meeting I'm going to have in this one meeting is going to be listening and being curious. Then I'm going to get to giving the feedback. Now, one of the things you have to be careful about, because people do this, is if you have half an hour, don't spend 25 minutes on meeting 1 and then leave yourself 5 minutes for, and then you drop you drop it on them and then you have to leave. So, I mean, make sure there's an abundant amount of time for both. Okay. So before I get to meeting 2, any questions or thoughts on that before I get to the idea of meeting 2?
I think even that first frame is really powerful, which is that to think of it as 2 meetings. So it either is physically 2 meetings, or think of it as 2 chapters of the same meeting, very, very intentionally. And what I'm taking away is, like, if we go in without meeting 1 and we go, and I know we're going to talk about meeting 2 in a second, but if we go straight to almost like an aggressive pose, the person's going to get defensive and they're not going to receive anything.
Yeah, a lot of times it happens because we're a little nervous. We've been thinking about this.
It could be. Yeah.
We're worried about their reaction. And ironically, our worry about their reaction creates a reaction in us that makes it more likely that they're going to react negatively. So, and part of that second meeting, we calm down a little bit. We've been listening, and so we can show up more skillfully.
I still had a couple more things on meeting 1. So then what I loved about the curiosity is it's going to lower that defensiveness altogether and get them in a different frame. You're going to test their self-awareness because they might already know and they might be struggling with it and they need help. And you are going to find out new information if you're truly listening. And now you've set a completely different frame to then the all meet, go straight in and go, Bill, you've been a jerk lately. That's not going to help anyone, right?
You're messing up in this project. I need you to get better.
Yeah. That doesn't help anyone. Okay. Conversation 2.
Okay. Now, first of all, conversation 2, go back to episode 305 and listen to the SOS. Because you got to put your oxygen mask on first. You got to manage yourself. You got to make sure you show up. And you might be a little anxious and nervous, but if you're too anxious and nervous, you're going to trigger them. So number 1, do your self-care. Okay. Number 2, plan the conversation. I think most people know that. Don't just go in. So in the plan, you want to do a couple things. One is you want to clarify a positive intention for the conversation. I'm giving you this feedback because I think you could be one of my top performers. I'm going to share this with you because I want us to have a great working relationship. Or I want this project to, be successful, like whatever it is, so that, because if you just start launching, all their negative beliefs come up. Oh, I'm in trouble. They're not happy with me. They don't like me. They're trying to get me in trouble. They're criticizing me. So you share a positive intention, which calms their emotional system down. Oh, I'm safe. Mick has my best interest in mind. Now I can hear. So start with a positive intention.
Yeah, really good. So I've got your back. I want to give you this feedback because I believe in you and I want to see you knock it out of the park. Is different to, Bill, I got to talk to you about blah, blah, blah. Right. So yeah, very good.
Yeah. If it's a behavioral issue, you have to be specific about behaviors. You can't say, oh, people think you're rude. You have to stop being rude. Well, what do you mean I'm rude? Who said I'm rude? You have to be, okay, in the meeting, when you interrupted Jane, she would have felt, or you interrupted me, I felt. And by the way, as much as you can, you make it the I feel statements, right? The I experienced this. So you want to not, oh, Jane told me this. Well, when Jane doesn't. So you want to make it about your own observations as much as possible. And you want to be specific about behaviors so that the person can maybe acknowledge, okay, I can maybe see where when I didn't step up and say something, that affected the team. So it isn't just about, the make a mess behaviors. You also want to coach people who are avoiding. So be specific about the behaviors.
Yeah, really good. Clear is kind on this one. And if we're not specific, it doesn't help, right? So you've been a jerk lately, doesn't help anyone. In Friday's sales meeting, you interrupted Sally 3 times when she was trying to share this data and the impact was this.
And right. And then tie it into impact. Exactly. Tie it into the impact and then tie it back to how it would be positive for them if they then changed the behavior or they hit the deadline or not, I need you because I'm on the line for this. It's like, no, how's that going to benefit them? So then you tie it into how does it benefit them to change their behavior or take something on that you need or have them deliver something. So you tie it in a positive benefit. The final thing in the preparation is you need to be clear about what's the last 8% that you need to say, no matter what their reaction is. Because you could do all the right things to set this up for success, and they still might shut down or react negatively or get defensive. And what you can't do is then say, oh, I guess then I won't step in. I guess I'll soft pedal it. I'll sugarcoat it. You got to be clear going in. I have to let the person know that if they can't improve on meeting this deadline, that's going to have an impact on their whatever performance review. Or like you have to be clear about what you're going to say in that meeting and not leave the meeting without saying it.
I think I'm hearing 2 things there, Bill, if I can. All right. So I love that you're doing all of this in the preparation. You're not doing it on the spot. And then the 2 things, I love that you're being clear about what is that last 8% that I'm going to say no matter what. It's almost like a contracting with yourself so that you don't backpedal or water it down at the key moment. But number 2, the underpin there is almost preparing yourself of, and this is part of the fear, by the way, but you have to prepare for this. What if they cry? What if they disengage? What if they get aggressive? Make a contract with yourself as to what you're going to do in each of those situations. And it is different. So this is one that people fear, Bill. So what do we do if they cry? What do we do if they disengage? What do we do if they get aggressive?
Absolutely. And that, I mean, it's rare when you handle it skillfully in the way we're saying, it happens a lot less and it might be a lot less intense, but it absolutely can still happen. And that's what I'm saying. You've got to let go of how their reaction influences what you're going to, share.
Yeah, good. Okay. All right. Excellent. All right. So we've covered a lot on feedback. I just want to add one that's important to me, Bill, and I'm testing it with you, but it's also one that I believe in. I also believe in the closing of any feedback situation that there needs to be an agreement on what was just said, right? And there's too many times where I hear of, to use your term, last 8% conversations that on the surface went okay, but both parties walk away with a different understanding of what just happened. So if we don't summarize at the end, and my tip on this one is to get the other person to summarize if they can, right? So hey, what if we just agreed? Or what was your biggest takeaway from our conversation today? Something like that for them to say in their words so that they don't walk off. I think you said something similar to this last time, Bill, that you feel like, oh, phew, I finally said what I had. I was off my chest. I got it off my chest. But the other person walks away going, oh, boss thinks I'm doing a great job because it didn't land. It didn't land. So you got to make sure with a confirmation at the end, you need to close the loop to make sure it landed. How does that sit with you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that was the second last thing I was going to say is that summarizing, and I love your point of try to get the other person to summarize. If it comes down to you, by the way, if you want to learn summarizing skills, listen to a Mixed Beers podcast because he has this amazing ability to summarize all the way along.
Oh,
you really do a great job of that.
Okay. All right. Brilliant. So we've covered one of the three. Let's put the other two together because they somewhat go hand in hand.
Can I just share one more thing?
Yes, please.
The final thing is don't assume that was the only meeting you're going to have about this. I mean, unless it was the person, yeah, I totally agree, and I'm doing this, and and it was easy. But it's like, schedule the next meeting. Let's talk again next week about this because they've had time to process it. They want to talk to their family. They talk to their peer. So schedule a follow-up meeting. These aren't, magic bullets where people suddenly completely change because you had one conversation with them. Schedule the next meeting.
Excellent. All right. Love it, Bill. Okay. So we covered feedback. I'm going to throw the other two together, even though they're not identical. There's some commonality between them. And that is a last 8% culture of high courage, high connection when it comes to risk-taking and decision-making. How do we lean into that, Bill?
I mean, when we talk about the last 8%, it's really the gap between the risk we know we should take and the risk we are taking. Now, sometimes that's a conversation, but sometimes it's, I've been offered this new, to be on this project, but I'm not confident. I've been asked to do something, but I don't feel comfortable that I have enough skills or I know enough. Applying for a job, like looking at the run and saying, oh, I don't know, I don't think I have enough. Like, I'm not saying go apply for jobs you're not qualified for, but sometimes so it's that whole idea of taking risks and putting ourselves out there when it feels uncomfortable. And we know when we're not taking the risks we know we should take. And it's about recognizing that and trying to meet that gap between, that 8% gap between what we know we should take and what we are actually taking.
Yeah, really good. And this is going to show up in different ways of some of the things that we spoke about before around the frustration. For example, if the risks aren't being taken or if the decision making is not there, that people get frustrated. They go, oh, why can't we just move on with this? And they're like, okay, really good, Bill. All right, you've given us a lot to think about again today. I've just absolutely adored this conversation. The short summary for everyone listening is the culture map. We're going to put this in the show notes, the link to the Harvard Business Review report, and you can see the picture for yourself and start looking at it more deeply as to what it could mean in your organization. And your organization will fit into these different quadrants somewhere. So,
I've had people say, we have all 4 types of cultures with this company.
At different times or different teams. Yeah, I can imagine.
Different times on different teams. And yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, good. All right. So if you have high courage and low connection, you're going to have that transactional environment where toxicity can come through. It might work in the short term, results over relationships, but it won't work in the long term. If you've got the lovey-dovey pillow environment where there's high connection, low courage, that's a family environment, but it leads to frustration, particularly for your high performers. And you yourself might get frustrated that you're just not getting things done. In low connection and low courage, that's that command and control, fear-based organization. They do still exist, by the way, Bill, like you said. It might be a smaller percentage now, but this is one where there's a bottleneck in the organization and it's all around a fear-based command and control situation. And what we want you all to get towards is this last 8% of high courage, high connection. But the big takeaway here from Bill is that it starts with connection. Have those conversations where you get to know people, where you set the scene. The connection then gives you the license and the environment where you can have the courage. You can have the courage. They can have the courage when the connection is there. Then the connection looks like high accountability, high care. So it's not one or the other. It's both high accountability and high care. And it shows up in feedback, shows up in risk-taking, and it shows up in decision-making.
Absolutely. And the one thing to add is, and when we do our culture system work, is we actually have teams have those conversations about what kind of team they want to be, how they want to handle conflict, how they want to handle, and what their agreements are. So that when someone speaks up, it's not, oh, they're just speaking out of turn. It's like, no, we agreed we would share inconvenient truths or challenge the status quo. So there's actually a team discussion and agreement.
And I love that what I'm taking away from that, Bill, is it's before the high cortisol moment, not in the moment, not in the moment. It's already too late if it's in the moment. Okay. All right, really good, Bill. Now, you've already answered our last 4 questions that we ask all of our guests. So I'm going to ask you just one more. What's one thing that you would like to see in organizations? One piece of advice that if someone is listening to this show and they're going, oh, shit, yeah, I'm in the top left quadrant or I'm in the bottom right quadrant and we're stuck. What's the one thing that you would like to see them do differently?
I'd like to see them recognize that culture and leadership, it isn't just a nice to have, it's actually the driver of your strategy. It's the operating system. Jim Voss is the CEO of Tenneco Automotive, 65,000 person automotive maker that we've done a lot of work with. And he's like, yeah, our culture is our operating system. That's how we get stuff done. That's how we execute and drive results. He's very driven. They're a very driven organization, but they do it with this high care, kind of high accountability culture. So it's to recognize how important culture and your people are to driving strategy. It's not one or the other. You have to have both.
Yeah, I love it, Bill. All right, well, thank you so much again. You know, you've come back and you've shared another chunk of your time with us and shared your wisdom, and you've given us very practical things that we can all recognize in ourselves, by the way, and then lean into and take action. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure. You do such a great job. Thank you.
Yet another powerful conversation there with Bill Benjamin. So let me ask you, what does your culture actually look like when it's tested? Not when things are easy, but when there's pressure, disagreement, or something difficult that needs to be said. Do people step forward with courage? Do they feel safe enough to be honest? Or do they hold back, avoid, and protect themselves? Because one of the biggest takeaways from this conversation is this. Great cultures don't choose between care and accountability. They insist on both. And that's not easy. It requires leaders who are willing to go into what Bill calls the last 8%, those harder conversations, those uncomfortable moments, those situations where it would be easier to stay silent. But that's where culture is truly shaped. So here's something to reflect on. Where might you be over-indexing on connection and avoiding the hard conversations? Or where might you be leaning too heavily on results without creating the trust and connection people need? Because your culture is not what you say it is. It's what your people experience, especially when it matters most. In the next episode, we shift the conversation again. We move from culture to something deeper. What people are actually searching for at work and in life. In my next conversation, I'm joined by Anthony Silad. We explore happiness, meaning, and why so many leaders are chasing the wrong things. You've been listening to The Leadership Project. If today sparked an insight, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with one other person who would benefit from listening to the show. A huge thank you to Gerald Calabo for his tireless work editing every episode, and to my amazing wife, Say, who does all the heavy lifting in the background to make this show possible. None of this happens without them. Around here, we believe leadership is a practice, not a position. That people should feel seen, heard, valued, and that they matter. And that the best leaders trade ego for empathy, certainty for curiosity, and control for trust. If that resonates with you, please subscribe on YouTube and on your favourite podcast app. And if you want more, follow me on LinkedIn and explore our archives for conversations that move you from knowing to doing. Until next time, lead with curiosity, courage, and